The Wedding Beneath the Willow. The morning sunlight fell in ribbons through the ancient willows that bordered the Ashbourne estate, their silver-green leaves whispering softly in the wind like voices of the past. Beneath their weeping branches stood Evelyn Ashbourne, radiant, nervous, and heartbreakingly young, in a gown of white satin that shimmered like liquid moonlight. Her hands trembled as she held a small bouquet of wild lilies, their fragrance mixing with the scent of wet grass and summer rain. The manor behind her, Ashbourne Hall, her ancestral home, glowed golden in the dawn. Its grey stone walls and towering windows had witnessed centuries of laughter, betrayal, and vows, much like the ones she would speak today. Evelyn had grown up within those walls, watching her widowed father slowly lose himself to grief, watching seasons pass through glass, as she learned embroidery and the etiquette of the nobility. Yet she had never imagined herself standing here, waiting for the man she loved to arrive and claim her hand before all of society. "Breathe, my lady," whispered her maid Clara, fussing with the veil. "You look as though you've seen a ghost." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Perhaps I have. My mother wore this veil when she wed my father beneath this very tree." Her voice trembled with the thought. The willow's low-hanging branches had always been her sanctuary. As a child, she would sit beneath them, sketching the pond, dreaming of freedom beyond the estate walls. Now they formed a canopy of promise and memory over her wedding ceremony. And then she saw him. Lord Tristan Vale, heir to one of the oldest titles in Somerset, approached with a quiet confidence that made every eye turn. He cut a striking figure, tall, broad-shouldered, his black hair swept neatly back, his grey eyes steady and unreadable. The corners of his mouth lifted in a faint smile, though his gaze carried the shadow of something unspoken, something that made Evelyn's heart twist with both love and unease. Tristan bowed before her, taking her trembling hand. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice deep and smooth, "you are more beautiful than sunlight on water. I am the luckiest man alive." She blushed, her nerves dissolving. "And I, the luckiest woman." Behind them, the small gathering of guests, noble families, distant cousins, and local villagers who adored the Ashbournes, watched with gentle smiles. The officiant, a kindly vicar with thinning hair, cleared his throat and began the vows. Evelyn barely heard the words. Her eyes were locked on Tristan's, searching for reassurance, for warmth. But sometimes, in the flicker of his gaze, she thought she saw something else. A flicker of pain, perhaps, or regret. "Do you, Lord Tristan Vale, take Lady Evelyn Ashbourne?" "I do." "And do you, Lady Evelyn Ashbourne, take Lord Tristan Vale?" "I do," she whispered, the words trembling out of her like the Ihow softest prayer. When they sealed their vows with a kiss, the willow branches swayed above them, scattering sunlight and shadows alike across their faces. The applause was gentle, sincere. The string quartet began to play. Evelyn laughed through her tears, clutching Tristan's hand as they turned to face their guests. She thought, this is the beginning of forever. Later, during the feast at Ashbourne Hall, Evelyn floated through the grand ballroom like a dream, her gown sweeping across polished marble, her veil removed to reveal hair the colour of chestnut silk. The chandeliers burned like captured stars. Everywhere, guests toasted to the newlyweds' happiness, to their youth, to their future heirs. Tristan was charming, effortlessly so. He laughed with the dukes, danced with the dowagers, and spoke to Evelyn with a tenderness that made her heart bloom. Yet each time their eyes met, she felt a strange distance behind his smile. as though part of him remained far away, locked behind invisible walls. Her father, Lord Alaric Ashbourne, leaned toward her as they dined. "He's a fine man," he murmured approvingly. "The Vales have weathered many storms, but this union will strengthen both our houses. You've done well, my dear." Evelyn smiled politely but said nothing. She had not married for status. Against her father's initial objections, she had married for love, or what she believed was love. That night, when the last of the guests had retired and the music faded into silence, Tristan led her out onto the terrace. The air was cool, fragrant with roses and the sound of crickets. "Are you happy, my lady wife?" he asked, his voice low. Evelyn looked up at him, eyes soft. "More than I've ever been." He brushed a loose curl from her cheek. "Then I am content." But as he turned to gaze out across the darkened gardens, Evelyn noticed how his jaw tightened, how his fingers curled slightly against the stone railing. "Tristan," she whispered, "is something troubling you?" He paused for a moment too long before smiling. "Nothing that concerns you, my heart. Merely old ghosts. I'm a man with complicated memories." Evelyn touched his hand gently. "Then let me help you forget them." For a moment, his eyes softened. He drew her close, kissed her forehead and whispered, "You already have." The days that followed were golden. They spent their honeymoon riding through the countryside, laughing in meadows, stealing kisses in the orchard. Evelyn began to believe the shadows she glimpsed were merely the weight of Tristan's past, the grief of losing his parents, the pressure of managing his family's estate. But then small things began to unsettle her. One afternoon, while Tristan was away on business, Evelyn wandered through the manor library, a vast candlelit room lined with books older than memory. She noticed a desk drawer slightly ajar. Inside lay letters tied with a black ribbon. Out of innocent curiosity, she untied them. The handwriting was Tristan's. The letters were addressed to someone named Isolde. "My dearest heart," one began, "the thought of our last night together haunts me still. Forgive me, but the Ashbourne fortune is the only path left to save Valhurst. Once the vows are spoken, we shall have what we need, and perhaps then our future." Evelyn's breath caught. The paper slipped from her fingers. For several seconds she stood frozen, her mind a storm of disbelief. "No," she thought, "there must be an explanation. Perhaps it was written long ago, before he met me." She forced herself to place the letters back, her hands trembling. But deep inside, a seed of doubt took root, a quiet, poisonous whisper that would not leave her. That evening Tristan returned, dust on his boots, exhaustion in his face. He smiled when he saw her. "Evelyn, you've been waiting up." She forced a smile. "I couldn't sleep." He came to her, kissed her hand. "You worry too much. You're safe now, you're mine." His words were meant as comfort, but they rang oddly in her ears. "You're mine, not I am yours." As he disappeared into the adjoining chamber to change, Evelyn turned toward the window. The moon hung low over the gardens, pale and watchful. Beneath the willow tree where they had wed, the shadows pooled thick and dark, as if the earth itself had swallowed their vows. And though she didn't yet understand it, that night marked the beginning of her undoing. The first thread pulled loose in a tapestry she had thought unbreakable. For the bride who had worn white for love would one day wear it again, not as a symbol of devotion, but of vengeance. The veil of lies. The summer faded into a softer light. The orchards ripened, the air smelled of pears and drying roses, and Ashbourne Hall seemed to hum with quiet contentment. To the world, Lord and Lady Vale were the image of perfect wedded bliss. But Evelyn knew that perfection was an illusion. The letters haunted her. Every time Tristan smiled, every tender glance or whispered, "My love," she felt the cold ink of those words burning beneath his gestures. Once the vows are spoken, we shall have what we need. Had he truly married her for money? Was she a means to an end? The key to saving his family estate, Valahurst, from ruin? She tried to banish the thought, tried to believe in the man she had loved. But once trust begins to crack, even the smallest doubt becomes a chasm. That morning, Evelyn sat by the window of her dressing room, embroidering while Clara brushed out her long hair. Rain misted the gardens below, and the willow swayed like a grieving woman. "My lady," Clara murmured, "you've scarcely eaten these past days. His lordship will worry if you make yourself ill." Evelyn smiled faintly. "He doesn't notice such things." "Forgive me, but that's not true. He asks for you every hour he's away." Evelyn looked out at the rain. "And yet I know so little of where he goes." Clara hesitated, needle stilling in her hand. "He said his affairs are urgent. The Valahurst mines, I think." "Perhaps," Evelyn whispered, "perhaps." But the ache in her heart told her otherwise. That evening, Tristan returned home earlier than usual. His coat was damp, his boots muddied, but his expression was composed. He found Evelyn in the music room, her fingers tracing idle melodies on the piano. "My darling," he said, coming to stand behind her, "you look like a ghost. Have you been here all day?" "I was playing," she replied softly, her hands still moving over the keys. "It's peaceful when the rain falls." He bent to kiss her hair. "You should have called for me. You know I hate leaving you alone." "Do you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He froze. "What do you mean?" Evelyn turned on the stool, her eyes meeting his. "I found your letters, Tristan." For a moment, silence ruled the room, heavy, suffocating. The fire crackled faintly in the grate. Tristan's expression did not crumble. He didn't shout or pale. He simply inhaled, slow and deliberate, as if preparing for a role he'd rehearsed 100 times. "Letters?" he said. "To whom? You know to whom." Evelyn's voice shook despite her effort to steady it. "To Isolde." The name seemed to hang in the air like a curse. Tristan turned away, hands braced against the mantel. "You went through my things." "I did," she said, "and I regret it, but I regret more what I found." His shoulders stiffened. "That was years ago, before I met you." Her throat constricted. "Then why do the letters speak of our marriage? Why do they speak of me as a transaction?" He turned sharply, his grey eyes storm dark now. "You don't understand, you couldn't. My family, your family." Evelyn rose, her voice trembling. "Or your ambition." He moved toward her too fast, his tone hardening. "Listen to me, Evelyn. Valahurst was dying. The debts my father left behind were crushing. I had no choice but to marry advantageously. It was survival." She recoiled as if struck. "So it's true, then. I was your salvation." "No," he said quickly, reaching for her hand. "At first, yes, I thought of the match as practical. But I came to love you. That's the truth." Her tears burned hot down her cheeks. "And this Isolde? Was she part of that truth?" He hesitated, just a second too long. Evelyn pulled her hand free. "You don't need to answer. I see it now." Tristan exhaled, frustration twisting his features. "Evelyn, she was a mistake. A foolish, youthful attachment. I ended it long before we wed." "Then why were you writing to her after our wedding?" His silence was louder than any confession. Evelyn's breath hitched. "You planned this. You married me, took my dowry, and I saved us." Tristan's voice cracked through the room. echoing off the marble. Valahurst's workers would have starved. My tenants would have been turned out. I did what I had to do. And what of me? Evelyn whispered. What did I have to do to deserve this? He stepped forward, desperation softening his anger. I meant what I said under the willow. I love you, Evelyn. You're my heart now, not her. You must believe that. But she couldn't. Not any more. She looked at him through tears that blurred his face into a stranger's. I don't even know who you are. That night, they slept in separate rooms. The house felt colder than the rain outside. Evelyn lay awake listening to the storm, her heart hammering with every roll of thunder. At dawn, she rose and wandered the halls, her footsteps echoing like ghosts. Passing the servants' quarters, she overheard hushed voices, Clara's whisper, and the butler's reply. Is it true, then? Clara said softly. His lordship means to sell the southern lands? Aye, the butler answered grimly. The Ashbourne dowry wasn't enough. Valahurst bleeds silver. They say he's been gambling to cover the losses. Evelyn froze. Her breath came shallow. So that was it. Her fortune wasn't saving him. It was being devoured by his desperation. She turned and fled up the staircase, gripping the banister until her knuckles whitened. By the next evening, Tristan had left again. Urgent business in London, the letter said. No return date given. Evelyn tried to occupy herself with her sketching, her garden, her books. But everything reminded her of him. The roses he'd planted by her window. The music sheets he'd bought her from Paris. All of it now felt tainted. Reminders of a man who had used love as currency. Still, part of her ached for him. Despite everything, she wanted to believe there was goodness buried somewhere in him, something that once was true. 3 days passed before she learned the truth. It came in the form of a letter, delivered in a black-sealed envelope bearing the Vale crest. It was not from Tristan. My Lady Vale, forgive the intrusion, but I write on behalf of my mistress, Lady Isolde Fairfax. I regret to inform you that Lord Vale has taken residence at her London townhouse these past nights, citing urgent affairs. My mistress is indisposed, but I thought it proper that you should know the truth, should he have spoken otherwise. Yours faithfully, a friend. Evelyn's hand trembled so violently that the wax cracked beneath her thumb. Her world, once gilded and bright, seemed to collapse inward. That night, she stood once more beneath the willow tree where she had spoken her vows. The sky was grey, the pond mirror still. The gown she wore, the same white silk she had been married in, clung damply to her as mist gathered on her lashes. You lied, she whispered into the darkness. You took my love and turned it into your salvation. A tear slipped down her cheek. I was a fool. In the stillness, a single leaf drifted down from the willow, brushing her shoulder like a blessing or a farewell. And in that moment, Evelyn Ashbourne, the innocent bride who had believed in forever, died quietly inside. What remained was something colder, sharper. When Tristan returned weeks later, the house was empty. Evelyn had gone, leaving no note, no farewell, only her wedding ring, resting on the piano where she had once played for him. Underneath it lay a single sheet of parchment in her delicate hand. You married me for fortune, Tristan Vale. Now you may have it, but never again my heart. The widow's exile. The road from Somerset to Devon was long and unforgiving, a ribbon of mud and mist that seemed to stretch endlessly through the moors. Evelyn Ashbourne, or rather the woman who had once been Evelyn Ashbourne, rode in silence, her cloak drawn tight against the chill. Her carriage bore no crest now. The Ashbourne seal had been scraped away, the guilt dulled by travel. Beside her sat only Clara, her faithful maid, who had refused to be left behind when Evelyn fled Ashbourne Hall. The rain fell in fine threads, tracing the glass with silver lines. Evelyn stared out at the blurred horizon, where the heather rolled like waves beneath the low grey sky. "Will we stop soon, my lady?" Clara asked quietly. Evelyn's voice, once musical and bright, was now soft, distant. "Not my lady, Clara, not any more. My name is Mrs. Vale, or perhaps even less. The world must think me gone." Clara hesitated. "Then who shall you be?" Evelyn looked down at her gloved hands, at the faint indentation where her wedding ring had once been. "Someone else. Someone the world will not recognize." They arrived at a small village near the sea, a place called Hollowmere, where the cliffs rose high and sharp over grey waters. Evelyn rented a modest cottage at the edge of the village, overlooking the moors. It was small and damp, with uneven floors and salt stains on the windows, but it was freedom. The villagers were kind in their quiet way. They knew her only as Mrs. Ellison, a young widow from London seeking solitude after her husband's death. The story suited her well enough. She wore simple dresses now, no jewels, no lace, nothing that hinted of nobility. Her beauty remained, but it was the kind that drew whispers of sorrow rather than envy. In the mornings she walked along the cliffs, the wind tangling her hair as gulls wheeled overhead. In the evenings she sat by the hearth, sketching the sea or reading by candlelight. Slowly the ache in her chest dulled, not healed, but quieted, like a wound sealed over scar tissue. Sometimes she dreamt of Tristan, not the man he was, but the man she thought he'd been. And when she woke, the pain was like a blade twisting in her ribs. But Evelyn Ashbourne was gone, and she swore she would never again be a woman so easily broken. It was on one such morning, 6 months after her flight, that she first met Captain Adrian Blackwood. The sea had been restless that day, foaming white against the rocks. Evelyn stood on the cliffs sketching the horizon, her cloak billowing behind her, when she noticed a horse struggling up the muddy path below. A dark stallion, rider hunched low. The man looked half dead when he reached the summit. His coat was torn, his arm bound in a makeshift sling. Blood stained his sleeve. "Good heavens!" Evelyn gasped, dropping her sketchbook. "Sir, you're hurt!" He blinked at her through the wind, his features pale beneath several days' worth of stubble. I didn't mean to alarm you, madam. My horse slipped on the slope. I'll manage." But when he tried to dismount, his knees buckled. Evelyn rushed forward, catching his arm. "You'll manage to fall again if you insist on playing the hero," she said, steadying him with surprising strength. "Come, my cottage is just down the hill. You'll bleed to death in this wind." He gave a breathless laugh. "You're rather commanding for a widow." Evelyn's eyes flicked to his face. Sharp jaw, storm-grey eyes, a faint scar at his temple. Something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. "And you're rather talkative for a dying man," she replied, lifting his good arm over her shoulder. An hour later, he was settled by her fire, his wound cleaned and bound. Clara brewed tea while Evelyn examined his papers, which he had reluctantly surrendered. "Captain Adrian Blackwood," she read aloud. "Royal Army, recently discharged. You've been in France?" He nodded, wincing as she tightened the bandage. "Waterloo, what remains of it?" Evelyn paused. "Then you fought under Wellington?" "I did," he said, his gaze drifting to the flames. "If fighting is the word. I lost half my men before sunrise that day." A long silence fell between them, the kind that exists only between two people who both know loss too well. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He gave a small smile. "You've no reason to be. You didn't fire the cannons." "No," Evelyn said, returning his smile faintly. "But I know something of battles one doesn't choose." Over the next weeks the captain remained at her cottage while his arm healed. The villagers spoke kindly of him, a gentleman soldier with eyes like winter storms and manners too polished for a drifter. Evelyn told herself he would leave soon, that his presence was temporary. And yet she found herself listening for his footsteps on the floorboards, for his quiet humming as he mended tack or chopped wood. One evening, as twilight melted into the sea, he found her sitting by the window sketching. "You draw beautifully," he said, watching her pencil glide across the paper. "It passes the time," she replied, "and it helps me remember." He studied her face. "Remember what?" Evelyn hesitated. The truth rose to her lips but caught there. "Another life," she said finally, "one I left behind." Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable. "I've left lives behind too. Some of them still follow me." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. "You wear sorrow like armour." Evelyn looked up sharply. "And you wear guilt the same way." He chuckled softly. "Touché, madam." For the first time in months, Evelyn laughed, a soft, disbelieving sound that seemed to startle even her. As the days turned into weeks, something began to stir between them. Something quiet, cautious, and real. Adrian never pried into her past, nor she into his. They spoke of books, of music, of the sea and stars. He helped her tend the garden, repaired the gate, and taught Clara's nephew how to fish. He was gentle, but not fragile, strong, but never domineering. One evening, while the rain drummed against the roof, he told her of the war, how he'd lost his brother in the same battle that nearly took his own life, how he still woke some nights, hearing the thunder of cannons. Evelyn listened, her eyes glistening. "And yet you survived." He looked at her then, long and steady. Sometimes survival is its own kind of punishment. She understood that more than he could ever know. Weeks turned to months. The captain's arm healed, though he chose not to leave. He rented a small farmhouse nearby, under the pretense of seeking peace after war. But both he and Evelyn knew that peace had little to do with it. Their love did not begin with passion, but with comfort, the kind born of shared silence and understanding. A touch of the hand as she passed him tea, a glance across the garden that lingered too long. Yet Evelyn resisted. Her heart, though drawn to him, still bore the ghost of Tristan Vale. She had been a fool once. She would not be so again. One evening, as the sun set in molten gold, Adrian stood beside her on the cliff's edge. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked. She looked out at the horizon, the wind tugging at her hair. "I used to." "And now?" She turned to him, her eyes dark with memory. "Now, I believe in survival." He nodded slowly. "Then perhaps survival is where second chances begin." That night, as Evelyn lay awake listening to the waves, she realized something terrifying. For the first time since leaving Ashbourne Hall, she felt alive. Adrian had stirred something she thought dead, a longing, a tenderness, a fragile hope. But even as her heart began to heal, the past she had tried to bury stirred beneath the surface. For secrets never stay buried long. And soon a letter, sealed in black wax and bearing the Vale crest, would arrive at her doorstep. A heart reborn. The morning the letter arrived, Hollowmere was shrouded in fog, thick, white and breathless, like the sea had swallowed the land whole. Evelyn stood by the hearth, coaxing the fire to life when the knock came. Clara answered the door. Her gasp was soft but sharp. Evelyn turned just in time to see the letter pressed into Clara's trembling hands. Black wax, unbroken seal, the Vale crest glinting faintly beneath the grey light. For a moment, the room spun. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the poker until her knuckles went white. Clara closed the door quietly and turned, her eyes wide with concern. "It's from him, my lady." Evelyn didn't move. The fire popped softly, the scent of burning pine filling the silence. "Burn it," she said at last, her voice steady but brittle. "My lady, I said burn it." But as Clara hesitated, Evelyn's resolve faltered. Her heart, traitorous thing, whispered of answers, of closure, of truths left unfinished. "Give it to me," she said finally, holding out her hand. The letter was short, written in Tristan's familiar hand, elegant, deliberate, every loop and curve as perfect as she remembered. "My dearest Evelyn, forgive the intrusion. I have sought you for months, fearing for your safety. The fault is mine, I admit it freely. I wronged you in ways I can never undo. But please, hear me. All is not as it seemed. I beg you to grant me one meeting. There are matters concerning your inheritance, matters that threaten us both. I remain ever yours, in regret and in truth. Tristan Vale." Evelyn's vision blurred. She pressed the page to her chest, feeling the ink like a pulse beneath her palms. Matters concerning your inheritance? It sounded like another lie, another manipulation, but something in the tone chilled her. It wasn't the voice of a schemer. It was the voice of a man cornered. She stared into the fire. Threaten us both. Did he mean the fortune, the estate, or something darker? When Adrian arrived later that morning, he found her sitting at the table, the letter open beside a half-drunk cup of tea. He read the tension in her posture before he saw the paper. "Bad news?" Evelyn forced a smile. "A ghost?" He glanced at the letter, then back at her. "From him?" Her silence was answer enough. Adrian exhaled slowly. "And what does the ghost want?" "To see me, to explain, to warn me, perhaps." His brow furrowed. "You can't go." Evelyn's voice was calm, though her eyes were far away. "I haven't said I would." "You don't have to," he said softly. "I see it in your face. You want answers?" She met his gaze. "Wouldn't you?" Adrian stepped closer, his presence warm and steady. "He hurt you, Evelyn. Whatever he has to say, it won't give you peace." She looked down. "Perhaps not, but it might give me something else." "What?" She lifted her chin. "Understanding." For several days, she told herself she would ignore it. She threw herself into her sketches, into tending the garden, into the illusion of normalcy. But the letter gnawed at her. And when Adrian rode into the nearby town one morning for supplies, she made her choice. She wrote a brief note for Clara. "I'll return by dusk. Tell no one where I've gone," and slipped the letter into her cloak. The coach to Bath left at noon. Evelyn sat in silence as the countryside rolled past, her reflection pale and still in the window. The inn where she was to meet Tristan was small and discreet, tucked behind the market square. She entered with her hood drawn low, her heart pounding. He was already there, waiting at a corner table. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Tristan Vale looked older, thinner, hollow-eyed, his once polished charm worn to exhaustion. When he saw her, he stood too quickly as if afraid she might vanish. Evelyn. Her name on his lips was both a wound and a memory. "Lord Vale," she said, her tone formal, her spine straight. "You asked for this meeting. Speak your piece." He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. "Please," he said, lowering his voice. "I deserve your anger, but I need your ear. My family's creditors, They've uncovered documents tying your dowry to the mines at Valhurst. They're claiming rights over your fortune. If they succeed, they'll ruin you as well as me." Evelyn stared at him, her heart twisting. "You think I care for money now? After all you did?" "It's not just money," he hissed, glancing around. "They're ruthless men, Evelyn. They've already come for me, and they'll come for you next." She folded her arms. "Why warn me then? Out of guilt?" He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time she saw fear. Not arrogance, not manipulation, but genuine fear. "I'm trying to make it right," he whispered. "I thought I could save us both once. I was wrong. Let me do one thing right before it's too late." Evelyn hesitated. Part of her wanted to believe him, to reach across the gulf between them. Another part, the stronger part, remembered the night she fled Ashbourne Hall. Remembered the lies, the humiliation, the heartbreak. "You had your chance to make things right," she said coldly. "Whatever comes, I'll face it without your help." Tristan's voice broke. "Evelyn, please." She turned to leave. "Goodbye, my lord." The coach ride back to Hollowmere was long and silent. Evelyn stared out at the darkening sky, her reflection ghostly against the glass. She told herself she'd done the right thing, that she owed Tristan nothing, not even her forgiveness. But deep down, unease gnawed at her. His fear had been real. And that night, when she returned home, she found Adrian waiting on the steps, his face drawn with worry. "You went," he said simply. She nodded. "I had to." He stepped closer. "Did he hurt you?" "No, not in the way he used to." Adrian searched her face. "Then what did he say?" Evelyn hesitated. "That danger follows us both. I don't know if I believe him." "Then believe me," Adrian said firmly. "You're safe now. Whatever ghosts he's stirring, let them haunt him, not you." She looked at him, at his tired, earnest eyes, at the steadiness that grounded her when everything else felt uncertain. "Why do you care so much?" she whispered. "Because I've seen what happens when people let the past win," he said, "and I won't watch it happen to you." Something in his voice broke through her walls. Evelyn felt her breath catch, her composure slipping. "Adrian," he reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You deserve peace, Evelyn. You deserve to be loved without condition." She didn't resist when he kissed her. It was gentle, not hungry or hurried, but deep, patient and real, the kind of kiss that promises healing rather than passion. And in that moment, the walls around her heart, walls built of grief, betrayal and fear, finally began to crumble. Weeks passed. Evelyn and Adrian's bond grew stronger, no longer unspoken. He stayed most evenings, helping with repairs or reading by the fire while she sketched. Sometimes they laughed until the candle burned low. Other times they sat in silence, content in the warmth between them. Yet the world beyond Hollowmere did not stay silent. Whispers reached the village, and rumours of the Vale mines collapsing, of men lost, of debts unpaid. Then came word that Lord Tristan Vale had vanished from London, his estate seized, his name disgraced. Evelyn listened quietly to the gossip in the market, her face unreadable. When she returned home that evening, Adrian was waiting at the gate. "News travels fast," he said softly. "Yes," she replied. "It seems the ghosts have caught up to him." Adrian studied her. "Do you pity him?" "I don't know," she said, "but I no longer hate him." He smiled faintly. "Then perhaps your heart truly is reborn. But fate is cruel to those who think themselves free of it." 2 nights later, a rider arrived at the cottage, soaked, breathless, wild-eyed. "Mrs. Ellison," he gasped. "There's been an accident at the Valahurst mines. They found him, Lord Vale, barely alive. He's asking for you." Evelyn's teacup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Adrian stepped forward, his jaw tight. "You can't go." "I must," Evelyn whispered. "Whatever he's done, I must." Adrian caught her wrist. "He'll drag you back into his ruin." She looked up at him, eyes brimming with pain and resolve. "Then let me see what ruin looks like before it swallows us both." And so, as dawn broke cold and red over the cliffs, Evelyn Ashbourne, the woman who had once been a bride of love, and now a woman reborn of loss, mounted a horse and rode back toward the ghost of her past. The return to Ashbourne Hall, the journey to Valahurst, was long and unforgiving, the kind of cold that cut through bone and memory alike. Evelyn rode through the dawn mist with a single lantern swinging from her saddle. Every hoofbeat echoed like a heartbeat, steady, relentless, foreboding. It had been more than a year since she'd left behind the world that had betrayed her. Now, as the silhouette of Valahurst Manor emerged through the fog, tall, grey, and crumbling at the edges, it felt like riding into the mouth of her own past. The once proud estate was in ruin. Windows were boarded, gardens overgrown, the gates sagging with rust. The scent of damp earth and smoke clung to the air. Evelyn dismounted, her cloak whipping in the wind. The rider who had fetched her waited uneasily by the stables, unwilling to meet her eyes. "He's inside, my lady," he murmured, "in the west chamber. Doctor says he hasn't long." Evelyn nodded once, unable to speak. The west chamber had once been a ballroom. Sunlight and laughter had once filled its high ceilings. Now it was a sick room. The curtains were drawn tight, the hearth barely lit. The air smelled of medicine and despair. Tristan Vale lay upon the bed, pale and broken, his chest rising shallowly beneath the thin sheets. The man who had once commanded attention wherever he stood now looked like a ghost wearing his own skin. For a long moment, Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching him. He stirred, his eyes flickering open. "Evelyn!" The sound of her name from his lips, weak, reverent, pierced her like a knife. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You sent for me." He tried to smile. "You came. I came," she said quietly, "to see the end of what you began." Tristan's eyes softened. "I deserve your anger. You deserve worse." "I know," he coughed, wincing. "But there's something you don't know. Something I couldn't tell you before." Evelyn folded her arms. "I've heard enough of your secrets. This one concerns you," he said weakly. "And the mines, your father's estate, it's all bound to the same deeds. When the collapse happened, it wasn't an accident. They were sabotaged. The investors, they wanted the land, not the silver. They mean to take Ashbourne next." Her breath caught. "Ashbourne?" He nodded. "You must warn them. They'll come for what's left of your dowry, what they think you still own." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. Her father's house, her childhood home, it was still in his name, tied to her marriage contract. The same contract Tristan had orchestrated to save himself. "Who?" she whispered. "Who are they?" Tristan's eyes fluttered. "Lord Fenwick, Sir Thorn. They wanted control of the mines, and when I refused, he broke off, gasping. "Tristan," she said sharply, moving closer despite herself. "Stay with me." He reached for her hand. "I never stopped loving you, Evelyn, not truly." Her throat tightened. "Don't lie, not now." He shook his head weakly. "I lied once to win you. I won't lie to keep you now." His grip slackened, his breath faltering. "Forgive me, please." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I can't." but as he exhaled one last shuddering breath, she realized he had never heard her answer. Tristan Vale was gone. For a long while, Evelyn stood beside the bed, the firelight flickering across her pale face. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only an aching hollowness, a silence where anger had once lived. And yet beneath that silence, something else began to stir. Resolve. If Lord Fenwick and Sir Thorn had sought to ruin her family, to profit from the ashes of both Ashbourne and Valhurst, then she would not rest until they paid for every cruelty, every deceit, every scar they had left behind. Tristan had destroyed her once. But this was her chance to reclaim her name. She was no longer the bride who had worn white for love. Now she would wear it again for vengeance. Back in Hollowmere, Adrian waited for days. When Evelyn finally returned, her face was pale, her eyes shadowed. He met her at the door. "You're late." "I'm alive," she said simply. He searched her expression. "He's dead." "Yes." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Then it's over." Evelyn looked away. "No, Adrian, it's only begun." Within a week, invitations began to circulate through the noble houses of Somerset and Bath. The grand Ashbourne Winter Masquerade, to be held for the first time since Lord Alaric's death. No one knew who had organised it. The estate had been closed for years. Yet every letter bore the Ashbourne seal, and within each envelope was a single line. Ashbourne Hall had been abandoned for so long that Evelyn barely recognised it. Dust and ivy had claimed its walls, but the chandeliers still gleamed when lit. The marble floors still caught the candlelight like water. She had hired an entire staff under false names, funded by what remained of her dowry. And as the day of the masquerade drew near, whispers spread through the county that the mysterious hostess was a widow returned from exile, that she meant to reclaim her father's legacy. On the night of the ball, the halls glittered once more with life. Guests arrived in silks and jewels, their laughter echoing through the corridors. Evelyn stood at the top of the grand staircase, masked in silver lace, her gown white as frost. To the crowd, she was Lady Ellison, benefactress and recluse. To herself, she was Evelyn Ashbourne reborn. Clara watched her from the doorway. "You look like an angel, my lady." Evelyn's lips curved faintly. "Angels forgive, Clara. I do not." As the night wore on, the music swelled, violins and waltzes, laughter and whispers. Evelyn moved among her guests like a spectre of grace. No one recognized her beneath the mask, though a few paused, frowning at the familiarity of her voice. And then she saw them. Lord Fenwick and Sir Thorn, two men in their prime, their wealth obvious, their smiles serpentine. They had been Tristan's business partners once. Now they laughed easily, glasses of champagne in hand, speaking of mines and fortunes as though lives were not the price of their wealth. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She approached them with practised poise. "Gentlemen," she said sweetly, "you honour Ashbourne with your presence." Fenwick bowed slightly. "A pleasure, Lady Ellison. I must say this estate has risen from its grave most impressively." Thorn smirked. "And its hostess? Has she risen as well?" Evelyn smiled behind her mask. "Perhaps. Some ghosts find purpose in haunting the living." The men laughed, though uneasily. When the clock struck 10, she excused herself, gliding up the stairs to the balcony that overlooked the ballroom. From her vantage, she could see them both, the men who had profited from her ruin. Adrian stood below, watching her. He was unmasked, his uniform replaced by dark formal wear, his expression caught between pride and worry. She descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, until she stood before the gathered guests. The music softened. Every head turned. "Friends," she began, her voice calm but carrying through the hall. "You came tonight to celebrate the rebirth of Ashbourne Hall. But not all resurrections are so easily forgiven." A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Evelyn removed her mask. Gasps followed. "Lady Evelyn Vale," someone whispered. "Impossible," said another. Lord Fenwick paled. Sir Thorn dropped his glass. Evelyn's gaze swept over them. "You remember me, I hope. The foolish bride who wore white, the woman you ruined with your schemes." Fenwick stammered. "We did nothing illegal." "You destroyed lives," she cried, her voice breaking through the music. "You conspired to bleed both estates dry, to trap me in your web of debt and deceit." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Thorn's face turned red. "You can't prove a word of it." Evelyn reached into her bodice and withdrew a folded parchment, the original mining contracts Tristan had hidden from them, exposing their fraud. "Oh, but I can," she said quietly. Gasps rippled through the room as Adrian stepped forward, flanking her like a silent sentinel. Thorn lunged forward, but Adrian caught him by the collar, shoving him back. "You've done enough damage, sir," he said coldly. Evelyn turned to the stunned guests. "You will all bear witness tonight. Let it be known that Ashbourne's honour has been restored, and that the men who sought to destroy it will answer for their crimes." Fenwick's hand trembled. "You'll regret this." Evelyn met his gaze without fear. "I already have." By midnight, the ballroom was empty except for Evelyn and Adrian. The fire burned low, the echoes of music fading into silence. Adrian approached her, slowly. "You did it," she exhaled shakily. "No, I only ended what they began." He studied her face. "And now?" Evelyn looked around the great hall, her father's portraits, the chandeliers, the ghosts of her youth. "Now I begin again." Adrian reached for her hand. "Then begin with me." She looked up at him, her heart trembling, and for the first time in years, not from pain. "Yes," she whispered, "with you." But as the dawn light crept across the marble floors, Evelyn knew the past was not yet done with her. The revenge had been served, but the cost was still to come. For love and vengeance are never cleanly divided. And soon she would have to choose between them. The price of vengeance. The morning after the masquerade dawned quiet, almost unnaturally so. The grand hall that had pulsed with life the night before now lay empty, the scent of candle wax and spilled wine lingering in the air. The chandeliers still glittered faintly in the early light, but their sparkle felt cold, like the remnants of a dream. Evelyn stood at the foot of the staircase, her white gown now a memory folded neatly away upstairs. She wore a simple morning dress of dove grey, her hair unbound. There was no triumph in her expression, only exhaustion. The night's events had spread like wildfire through Somerset. By dawn, every noble household within 50 miles had heard that Lady Evelyn Vale, the lost bride of Ashbourne, had returned from exile to unmask her enemies. And though justice had been served in the eyes of society, Evelyn knew better than to trust the judgment of gossip. Adrian found her in the library. Standing before the tall windows overlooking the frost-touched gardens. "You haven't slept," he said softly. Evelyn's reflection met his in the glass. "No, I couldn't." "You did what you came to do," he said, walking closer. "They'll face ruin, perhaps even prison. The papers will print their names before the week is done." "Yes," she said quietly. "And still, it doesn't feel like victory." Adrian studied her. "What does it feel like?" "Like I've traded one ghost for another." She turned, her eyes weary. "I thought revenge would free me. Instead, it feels like I've stepped back into the very cage I escaped." Adrian's voice was gentle but firm. "You avenged your family, Evelyn. That's not a cage, that's closure." She shook her head. "Closure doesn't bring peace. It only silences the noise. For a while." He hesitated. "Then what will bring you peace?" Evelyn looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "Perhaps love, if I still have the heart for it." By noon, a courier arrived with news. Lord Fenwick had fled the county, abandoning his estates. Sir Thorn had been arrested in Bath under charges of fraud and conspiracy, thanks to the documents Evelyn had revealed. The Crown would seize their assets, but some of those assets, the courier explained nervously, were tied to her own name. Evelyn frowned. "My name? Yes, my lady. It seems Lord Thorn used your former dowry agreements as collateral in one of his ventures. The Crown will expect you to testify to clear the debts officially, or risk forfeiting what remains of your inheritance." The courier bowed and left. Evelyn stood silent for a long moment. Adrian stepped closer. "You don't have to face that courtroom. Let the lawyers handle it." "No," she said slowly, "I must stand there myself. If I've learned anything, it's that ghosts only lose their power when you look them in the eye." The trial in Bath was swift and brutal. The courtroom was filled with spectators, drawn by scandal and curiosity. Evelyn entered wearing black, her veil drawn, every whisper stilled as she took her seat. Across the room, Sir Thorn sat pale and sweating, his confidence gone. When the magistrate asked her to speak, she rose, hands clasped before her. "I was once the wife of Lord Tristan Vale," she began, her voice steady though soft. "I was deceived, humiliated, and left with nothing. The men before you sought to profit from that ruin. They used my name, my dowry, and my trust to line their pockets while others suffered. I stand here not to seek vengeance, I've already had that, but to reclaim what they stole, my voice." A hush fell over the court. Even Thorn's lawyer lowered his gaze. The magistrate nodded gravely. "Lady Vale, your testimony is sufficient. The court finds these contracts fraudulent and releases your inheritance in full." Evelyn inclined her head. "Thank you, my lord." When she stepped outside, the sunlight struck her face, bright, clean, unflinching. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. But freedom, she soon learned, comes with its own shadows. That evening, back at Ashbourne Hall, Adrian waited by the fire. His uniform lay folded neatly beside him. He'd resigned his post to stay by her side. She entered quietly. "It's done," she said. He looked up. "And now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought there would be joy. Instead, I feel hollow." He rose, taking her hand gently. "Maybe joy isn't found in endings. Maybe it's something we have to build from what's left." She smiled faintly. "And what's left of me, Adrian?" He touched her cheek. "Everything worth loving." Their kiss that night was slow, tender, real, not born of desperation or grief, but of something gentler. Evelyn melted against him, her walls crumbling once and for all. For a while, they forgot the world beyond the hall, the trials, the losses, the ghosts. There was only warmth and the quiet rhythm of two hearts finding home again. Weeks passed. Snow fell over Ashbourne, blanketing the estate in silence. Evelyn began to restore the old house, opening the halls that had been locked for years. Children from the nearby village came to play on the Ye Yill lawns. Laughter returned to the corridors that had once echoed with sorrow. Yet despite the peace around her, she sometimes woke at night, hearing Tristan's voice in her dreams. "Forgive me," it whispered. One evening, She stood before the old portrait of him in the gallery, his painted eyes full of charm and secrets. "I tried," she said softly, "but forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's learning to live without the wound." Adrian entered quietly behind her. "Talking to ghosts again?" Evelyn turned, smiling sadly. "Perhaps saying goodbye." He nodded. "Then let it be goodbye, my love. For good." She reached for his hand. "For good." The following spring the newspapers carried a quiet notice. Lady Evelyn Ashbourne and Captain Adrian Ellison were married yesterday at the restored Ashbourne Chapel. The bride wore white, simple, elegant, radiant. And those who remembered her whispered that she had worn white once for love, once for revenge, and now, at last, for peace. But as Evelyn stepped from the chapel that morning, sunlight streaming through the trees, she felt something unexpected. Not closure, but beginning. She looked at Adrian, her husband, her equal, and smiled. "Do you think the past ever truly dies?" He squeezed her hand. "No, but it changes shape. Like us." She laughed softly. "Then let it haunt someone else for a change." And as the bells rang out across the hills, Evelyn Ashbourne, the bride who had worn white twice, finally walked into a future of her own making. The second bride. The morning sun rose over the hills like a benediction, soft, golden, and full of promise. The mists that had once haunted Ashbourne Hall drifted away, revealing gardens newly in bloom and a sky as clear as glass. Bells tolled in the distance, slow and sweet, their echoes carrying across the fields. Inside the chapel, Evelyn Ashbourne stood before a tall mirror. For the second time in her life, she wore white. But this gown was different. Not the silk-laden finery of nobility, not the vanity of wealth. It was a simple creation of satin and lace, unadorned except for the ribbon at her waist. She had chosen it herself. It felt lighter, freer, like a reflection of the woman she had become. Clara fastened the last pearl button at her nape, her hands trembling slightly. "You look radiant, my lady, as if heaven itself has blessed you." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Heaven had its chance, Clara. I think this blessing I've made myself." Clara wiped her eyes discreetly. "You've earned it, every moment of it." Evelyn turned to her reflection one last time. The woman who gazed back was not the naive bride who had once walked beneath the willow trees, nor the vengeful ghost who'd unmasked her enemies. She was something in between, tempered, scarred, but whole. For a long moment, she let herself breathe, and then the chapel doors opened. Adrian stood waiting at the altar. He wore no medals today, no uniform, only a dark suit and the expression of a man who had waited a lifetime to see this moment. When Evelyn entered, every sound seemed to fade. Their eyes met, and she saw reflected there everything she had fought for: safety, truth, love without deceit. As she walked down the aisle, her steps slow and sure, the memories of her first wedding rose unbidden. The laughter of the guests, the scent of lilacs, Tristan's hand on hers as he swore eternal devotion. That vow had turned to ash. But this time there were no witnesses of power or privilege. Only a few friends from the village, Clara, and the man who had taught her what strength looked like when it was kind. When she reached the altar, Adrian took her hand. His thumb brushed over her wrist, feeling the faint tremor there. "You're shaking," he whispered. "So are you," she replied softly. He smiled, his eyes bright. "Then we're even." The old priest began to speak, his voice steady and low. "Marriage," he said, "is not the binding of two souls to perfection, but the joining of two imperfect hearts in faith." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. When the time came for vows, She hesitated, not from doubt, but from the weight of what those words meant now. She looked up at Adrian, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. I thought love was something to be earned, bargained for, suffered for. But you taught me it's something that endures when everything else is lost. I give you what remains of my heart, and all that it has learned, the pain, the hope, the will to begin again. Adrian's breath trembled as he answered, You gave me purpose when I thought I'd lost mine. You made me believe in grace again. I vow to stand by you, not because you need me, but because I can't imagine a life without your light. The priest smiled, voice soft. Then, by faith and choice, I pronounce you joined. Adrian leaned forward, and their lips met, a kiss not of passion alone, but of absolution. The chapel erupted in quiet applause. Clara sobbed openly. Evelyn closed her eyes. For the first time in years, the white she wore did not feel like a shroud. It felt like dawn. Later, when the guests had gone and the light had turned amber through the windows, Evelyn and Adrian walked the grounds together. The air was cool, the scent of roses heavy. They came to the willow tree, the same one beneath which Evelyn had once stood as a different bride on a different day. Its long green fingers brushed the water, unchanged by time. Evelyn stopped there, her gown brushing the grass. Do you believe the past can ever truly die? Adrian tilted his head. No, but it can be forgiven. She looked at the willow, her voice quiet. The first time I wore white, I thought I was walking toward forever. I was wrong. The second time, I thought I was walking toward revenge. I was wrong again. Adrian took her hand gently. And now, she said, turning to him with a trembling smile, I walk toward peace. He leaned his forehead against hers. Then we'll walk there together. For a long moment, they simply stood, the wind whispering through the branches, the river murmuring below. It was then Evelyn reached into her sleeve and drew out something small, a silver locket. Inside was a faded miniature portrait of Tristan Vale. I kept it, she admitted quietly, not for love, for memory. She knelt by the water and opened the locket. The portrait caught the light one last time before she let it fall, watching it sink slowly beneath the surface until the ripples swallowed it whole. When she rose, she felt lighter. Adrian's hand found hers again. A funeral for ghosts. A farewell, she said, the last one. That night, the two of them stood on the balcony of Ashbourne Hall, watching the stars scatter like diamonds across the sky. The estate, once a place of grief and ruin, now glowed with life once more. The laughter of villagers drifted faintly from the courtyard below. Clara's lantern shone from the servants' quarters. Evelyn rested her head against Adrian's shoulder. It's strange, she murmured. I spent so long dreaming of revenge, of justice, and now all I want is quiet. Adrian smiled softly. You've earned your quiet. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think love is stronger the second time? He thought for a moment. No, he said finally, just wiser. She laughed softly. Then I suppose we are both wiser. Terribly so, he said, kissing her hair. Years later, when people spoke of Evelyn Ashbourne, they spoke not of the scandal or the heartbreak, but of the woman who rebuilt an empire of grace from ashes. Children played in the gardens she restored. The villagers spoke of her kindness. The poor were fed from her fields. And though she rarely wore white again, every spring she placed a single lily at the foot of the willow tree, a tribute not to a man, but to the woman she once had been. On her final evening, many years later, Evelyn sat by the window of her study, a shawl around her shoulders, watching the sunset fade into gold. Adrian's laughter echoed from the hall below, mingled with the laughter of their grandchildren. She smiled faintly. When Clara, now grey-haired herself, entered with tea, Evelyn reached for her hand. "Do you remember, Clara," she whispered, "the first time you helped me dress in white?" Clara chuckled softly. "I do, my lady. You were trembling then, too." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "I trembled because I thought love was an ending. I was wrong. It was a beginning, one I had to find twice." She looked out the window one last time, toward the willow beyond the hills. The setting sun turned the sky the colour of pearls. "I wore white twice," she murmured, smiling as her eyes drifted closed. "Once for love, once for revenge, and perhaps both for myself." The last light of day fell across her face, serene, luminous, unafraid, and as the evening bells tolled, the willow beyond the hills swayed gently, as if bowing in farewell.